So we're going to be looking at proportions today, and we're going to concentrate first on how to set up a proportion, and then in the second half of the video we're going to talk about how to solve the proportion. All right, so first of all we just need to know what is a proportion. A proportion is actually an equation, and remember equations always have equal signs. Equations showing that two ratios are equal. All right, so we just talked about ratios. Ratios are just a way to compare two numbers. So when you have two ratios that are equal, here's an example, and then that's known as a proportion. All right, and just like there's two ways or three ways to write a ratio, you can write it as a fraction, you can use the colon, or you can use the word two. You can write proportions in any of these ways as well. However, the fraction is the most common, and it's the one we're going to be using to solve problems. But these are just as they're just as right. Okay. To set up a proportion, you need to think equal fractions. That just makes it easier to set everything up. So you're trying to make two fractions equal. You're going to set up a word ratio first. So this is probably the most important part of setting up a proportion. It's just comparing the words first. So remember, ratios compare things. If you compare the words first, you'll know how to compare the numbers. Then once you get your word ratio set up, you're going to use 4 boxes. And I'll explain more about this in a minute. But basically, if you look at a proportion, there are 4 numbers. All right, so we're going to think of each number as kind of being in its own box. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes that we're going to use to set up our proportion. All right, so let's look at a few examples. A worker can complete the assembly of 15 tape players in 6 hours. At this rate, how many tape players can the worker complete in a 40-hour work week? All right, so again, when you're working with proportions, you need to keep in mind that you're comparing two things. A ratio is just a way to compare two different parts. So to sort of demonstrate this, we're going to look for the words that are being compared. So a worker can complete the assembly of 15 tape players in 6 hours. And generally, the words that are repeated are the words being compared. So we're comparing how many tape players to the number of hours it takes to put them together. All right, so I've got 15 tape players. And later, I can see that it's asking me how many tape players, okay, compared to the number of hours. So I've got 15 tape players in 6 hours. And I've got how many tape players in 40 hours. All right, so my word ratio, what I'm comparing is the tape players to the hours. All right, that's the important first step because it's going to tell me where to put my numbers. My next step is to set up my 4 boxes, and I'm actually going to draw 4 boxes and fill them in. Okay. So we want to keep our boxes and numbers and words all in the same place. All right, so when it says 15 tape players, I'm going to look at where I put tape players here. It's at the top. So I'm going to put the 15 at the top. 15 tape players. Okay, 15 tape players went with 6 hours. All right, so the 6 is going to go with hours below the 15 with the 6. Okay, ours is on bottom, so the 6 is on bottom of the 15. And then the next thing says how many tape players. I don't have a number for that. It didn't give me one. But it asks how many they can make in 40 hours. So 40 hours, that's my next number. It's not tape players, it's hours. So 40 is going to go on the bottom. So when you're solving a proportion, you're always going to have one of your boxes that isn't filled in. And so we're going to use a letter. It can be any letter, but we use X a lot. And remember, X is just a variable that represents something that's not known. So right now we don't know how many tape players can be made in 40 hours. So at the end of the video, we're going to go ahead and solve this. But for now, we're just setting up the proportion. Right now, you've got your 4 boxes. They're all filled in, so you're set up. Okay, let's look at the second one. Carol spends 17 hours in a 2-week period practicing her culinary skills. That's cooking. How many hours does she practice in 5 weeks? All right, so did you hear what was being repeated in this one? I've got hours, 17 hours, compared to weeks, right? And then how many hours compared to 5 weeks? So those sound like the words I'm going to be comparing. So I'm going to be comparing hours to weeks. Now I'm going to draw my boxes and fill them in. So 17 hours, hours is on top. 2 weeks, weeks is on bottom, so 17 to 2, so the 2 goes on bottom of the 17. And then how many hours does she practice in 5 weeks? The weeks again is on bottom. And then I don't know how many hours goes with 5 weeks, so I'm going to let that be a letter. Now I can let it be any letter I want. I'm going to let it be H this time, just because that's the number of hours I'm looking for. All right, number 3. A rainstorm produced a rainfall of 2 inches per hour. How many hours would it take to get a rainfall amount of 1 foot? All right, so again, I'm talking about inches, 2 inches. And then when I look for inches again, I can see that I don't have inches, I have feet. So this can be a problem because I want these to always be the same. So what I have to do is I have to change the 1 foot into inches. So how many inches are in a foot? 12. I'm going to use that instead of the feet. So 12 inches is my next one. All right, so 2 inches in 1 hour. Per hour just means 1. How many hours, so this is what I'm looking for, how many hours would it take to get 12 inches? All right, so I'm comparing inches to hours and drawing my boxes. So 2 inches is on top, per hour, 1 hour is on bottom. Then how many hours would it take to get a rainfall of 1 foot? So remember we changed that to 12 inches, so where does inches go? Inches goes on top, and then I don't know how many hours it takes for 12 inches, so that's going to be my variable. I'm going to use X again. Number 4, the Millers drove 105 miles on 4 gallons of gas. At this rate, how many miles can they expect to drive on 6 gallons of gas? Okay, so I'm comparing miles, 105 miles. And I don't know how many miles, okay, to the gallons of gas. So for 105, I have 4 gallons. I want to know how many 6 gallons, how many miles 6 gallons will take me. Okay, so again, start with your words, miles and gallons. And you may think, why do I have to write all this stuff down? But it really does help you get everything in the right place. That way there's no question about where to put your numbers. So 105 miles, miles is on top, to 4 gallons. Gallons is on bottom, 4 gallons. At this rate, how many miles can they expect to drive on 6 gallons? So again, gallons is on bottom, so 6 goes with gallons. Then I'll be looking for this one here, and I'll use an M this time. Now, you might ask, can I switch it? Can I put gallons on top and miles on bottom? And the answer would be yes, just as long as you switch all the numbers as well. All right, number 5. On her last benchmark test, Norma's ratio of correct to incorrect answers was 3 to 1. If there were 36 questions on the test, how many did she get right? All right, so again, I'm looking for words that are repeating. So she's got a ratio of correct to incorrect. So I'm going to start with correct. There are 36 questions on the test. How many did she get right? So they didn't actually use the word correct again, but when you get something right, that's correct. So this is really going to go with that. How many did she get right? And then here they're comparing correct to incorrect answers, but if I keep reading, it says there were 36 questions on the test. So are those two things the same? Is the number of incorrect answers the same thing as 36 questions on the test? And that's no. So this one's a little tricky because they kind of switch things up on you. So they gave you a ratio of correct to incorrect, but then they didn't tell you how many were correct or incorrect on the test. They just told you a total. All right, so what happens is you're going to have to think a little harder on this one. All right, so we're comparing correct to the number of questions. So correct answers. And then the number, I could say number of questions, or I could just say the total questions. I'm going to go ahead and draw my boxes. And I know that she got 3 correct. That's what this means. She got 3 correct and she got 1 incorrect. That's what this ratio means. Okay, but that's not what I put here. I put total here. So if she got 3 correct and 1 incorrect, what was her total? Well, if I take the 3 she got right and the 1 she got wrong, and I add those together, I get how many? 4. So out of 4 questions, she got 3 right. All right, so I want to know how many she got right if there are 36 questions. So 36 questions, 36 is a total, that goes on bottom, and correct is what I'm looking for. That's going to be my X. All right, so now that we've had some practice setting these up, we want to look at how you solve them. All right, so that's the next step. To solve a proportion, you need to remember that the ratios are equivalent. And if that's true, the ratios are equivalent, this is a property of proportions, then the cross products are equal. Okay, some of you may have learned something called butterfly in elementary school. This is kind of based on that idea. All right, so when you're solving a proportion, your first step is still to set up your word ratio. Now, we've already done this part because we kind of split it into two pieces. But if you're just starting from the beginning, you want to start with words. Then you're going to draw your boxes, fill them in, okay? And then you're going to look at cross products. So you're going to circle the numbers that are diagonal from each other, okay? Because these are the first two numbers you're going to, a product means multiply. So you're going to cross multiply, basically, the diagonal numbers. We use baseball bat and baseball to sort of remember how to do this. I'll show you what I mean in just a minute. Okay, so you're going to go back to the 4 boxes you set up in this first one. So the next step is to circle the diagonal numbers. So that means the numbers that are across from each other. Right, so I'm going to circle these numbers. It kind of looks like a baseball bat. That's why we call it a baseball bat. And then what are you supposed to do with those numbers? You're supposed to multiply them, all right? Because this times this is equal to this times this, all right? So that's what we're going to use to solve this. So I'm multiplying these, 15 times 40. And it doesn't matter which number you put on top. So 0 and 20. And then start with a 0, 0, 4. And I get 600. Okay, so that's my first step. I know that that's going to be the same thing. This 600 is equal to 6 times something else. All right, so that's what I need to find next. So after you diagonally multiply, then you're going to divide by the number not circled. We call that the baseball. All right, so we go back to this example. Did you see that down there? Yeah. Okay, so then you're going to multiply this. So I know that 15 times 40 is the same thing as something times 6. All right, so I've done this part. Now I'm saying that something times 6 is equal to 600. Well, if I want to know what that is, I divide. So that's the number. I haven't used that. That's my baseball. That's the number I divide by. So 6 will go into 6. And then I'll go into 0. And then I'll go into 0. So 100 times. So what does this mean? Interpret your answer. It means that at this rate, how many tape players can the worker complete in a 40-hour work week? 6. My answer is going to be 100. Okay, X is equal to 100 what? Tape players. Okay. All right. So on number 2, you've set up the proportion. Now you're just going to solve it. All right. So you look for the numbers that are diagonal from one another. This time it's the 7. And the 5. I'm going to circle those. Okay, that's my baseball bat. I'm going to start by multiplying them together. 5 times 7 is 35. 5 times 1 is 5 plus 3 is 8. And then I'm going to divide by the number I didn't multiply. So dividing by the 2. 2 will go into 8 4 times. And then I'm going to bring down my 5. 2 will go into 5 2 times. I'm going to add a decimal and a 0 and bring down the 0. So 2 will go into 10 5 times. So that gives me 42.5. So I've solved for H. H is equal to 42.5 what? Hours. Okay, so this tells me that in 5 weeks she practices 42.5 hours. All right, number 3, again, I've already set it up so I can skip to the step of just multiplying and then dividing. So diagonally this time, it's the 1 and the 12. It's the diagonals are just across from each other. So 1 times 12 is just going to be 12. And then you divide by that last number, that 2. So 2 will go into 12 6 times. Okay, so X is equal to 6 and 6 what? 6 hours. How many hours did it take to get 12 inches? Okay. All All right, and number 4, it says the Miller's, well, we've already read it, that we're trying to solve for the number of miles that can be driven on 6 gallons. So we're going to multiply 105 times 6. That would be 3,630, and then you divide by the number. Okay, that last number is a 4. So it'll go into 6 once. Get 2, bring down the 3. 4 will go into 23 5 times, which is 20. And then bring down the 0. 4 will go into 37 times. That would be 2. I'm running out of room here. I'll bring down a decimal. I'm sorry, bring up a decimal, bring down a 0. 4 will go into 25 times. Okay, so that is going to give me 157.5 what? Miles for 6 gallons of gas. Okay, and then on the last one, it says on her last benchmark test, Norma's ratio of correct to incorrect answers was 3 to 1. Right, so we need to multiply diagonally. 36 times 3 is 108. And then I need to divide by 4. So 4 will go into 10 twice. And that gives me 2. Bring down the 8. 4 will go into 28 7 times. Okay, that tells me x is equal to 27, but 27 what? 27 correct answers. Okay, so that's proportions. To set up a proportion, you need to start by looking for the words that are being compared. So like tape players and hours and weeks and inches and hours. Then once you set up your words, set up your 4 boxes, fill those in, and then you're going to multiply diagonally and then divide by that third number. All right? Let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you in class.